Men of Iron, Chapter 28. It was not until more than 3 weeks after the king had left Delvin Castle that Lord George and his company of knights and archers were ready for their expedition to France. 2 weeks of that time Myles spent at Crosbey Dale with his father and mother. It was the first time that he had seen them since 4 years ago. He had quitted the low, narrow, white-walked farmhouse for the castle of the great Earl of Mackworth. He had never realized before how low and narrow and poor the farmhouse was. Now, with his eyes trained at the bigness of Delvin Castle, he looked around him with wonder and pity at his father's humble surroundings. He realized, as he never else could have, realized how great was the fall in fortune that had cast the house of Falworth down from its rightful station to such a level as that upon which it now rested. And at the same time that he thus recognized how poor was their lot, how dependent upon the charity of others, he also recognized how generous was the friendship of Prior Edward, who endangered his own safety so greatly in affording the family of a tainted lord an asylum in its bitter hour of need and peril. Myles paid many visits to the gentle old priest during the 2 weeks' visit, and had many long and serious talks with him. One warm, bright afternoon, as he and the old man walked together in the priory garden, after a game or two of draughts, the young knight talked more freely and openly of his plans, his hopes, and his ambitions than perhaps he had ever done. He told the old man all that the Earl had disclosed to him concerning the fallen fortunes of his father's house, and of how all who knew these circumstances looked to him to set the family in its old place once more. Prior Edward added many things to those which Myles already knew, things of which the Earl either did not know or did not choose to speak. He told the young man, among other matters, the reason for the bitter and lasting enmity that the king felt for the blind nobleman, that Lord Falworth had been one of King Richard's council in times past, and it was not a little owing to him that King Henry, when Earl of Derby, had been banished from England, and that though he was then living in the retirement of private life, he bitterly and steadfastly opposed King Richard's abdication. He told Myles that at the time when Sir John Dale found shelter at Falworth Castle, vengeance was ready to fall upon his father at any moment, and it needed only such a pretext as that of sheltering so prominent a conspirator as Sir John to complete his ruin. Myles, as he listened intently, could not but confess in his own mind that the king had many rational, perhaps just grounds for grievance against such an ardent opponent as the blind lord had shown himself to be. "But, sir," said he, after a little space of silence, when Prior Edward had ended, "to hold enmity and to breed treason are very different matters. My father was Bolingbroke's enemy, but surely you do not believe he is justly and rightfully tainted with treason?" "Nay," answered the priest, "how can ye ask such a thing? If I believed your father a traitor, think ye I would tell his son thray off? Nay, Myles, I knew your father well, and have known him for many years, and this of him, that few men are so honorable in heart and soul as he. But I have told you all these things to show that the king is not without some reason to be unfriendly to your father. Neither is the Earl of Alban without cause for enmity against him. So ye, upon your part, should not feel bitter rancor against the king, for what has happened to your house, nor even against William Brockhurst, the Earl of Alban. For I tell you, the worst of our enemies and the worst of men believe themselves always to have right and justice upon their side, even when the most wish evil to others." So spoke the gentle old priest, who looked from his peaceful haven with dreamy eyes upon the sweat and tussle of the world's battle. Had he instead been in the thick of the fight, it might have been harder for him to believe that his enemies ever had a right upon their side. "But tell me this," said Myles presently. "Do you then think that I do evil in seeking to do a battle of life or death with this wicked Earl of Alban, who has so ruined my father in body and fortune?" "Nay," said Prior Edward, thoughtfully, "I say not that ye do evil. War and bloodshed, they seem hard and cruel matters to me. But God has given that they be in the world, and may he forbid that such a poor worm as I should say that they be all wrong and evil." Myles did not fully understand what the old man meant, but this much he gathered, that his spiritual father did not think ill of his fighting the Earl of Alban for his temporal father's sake. So Myles went to France in Lord George's company, a soldier of fortune, as his captain was. He was there for only 6 months, but those 6 months wrought a great change in his life. In the fierce factional battles that raged around the walls of Paris, in the evil life which he saw at the Burgundian court in Paris itself, after the truce, a court brilliant and wicked, witty and cruel. The wonderful liquor of youth had evaporated quite rapidly, and his character had crystallized as rapidly into the hardness of manhood. Warfare, blood, evil pleasures which had been a fiery crucible thrust to his soul. He was no longer the innocent Sir Galahad, who had walked in pure white up the great hall to be knighted by the king, but his soul was that grim, sterling, rugged sort that looked out calmly upon the wickedness and debauchery round him, and loved it not. Then one day a courier came, bringing a packet. It was a letter from the Earl, bidding Myles return straight away to England and to Mackworth House upon the stand near London, without delay, and Myles knew that this time had come. It was a bright day in April, when he and Goskin rode clattered out through the Temple Bar, leaving behind them quaint old London town, its blank stone wall, its crooked dirty streets, its high gabled wooden houses, over which rose the sharp spire of St. Paul's Tower, higher into the golden air. Before them stretched the straight, broad highway of the Strand. On one side the great houses and palaces of princely priests and powerful nobles, on the other the Covent Garden, or the Covent Garden as it was then called. And the rolling country, where great stone windmills swung their slow-moving arms in the damp, soft April breeze. And away in the distance, the Scottish Palace, the White Hall, and Westminster. It was the first time that Myles had seen famous London town. He jogged along with Goskin, gazing about him with a calm interest at open shops and booths and tall gabled houses, at the busy throng of merchants and craftsmen, jostling and elbowing one another, at townsfolk, men and women, picking their way along the muddy kennel of a sidewalk. He had seen so much of the world that he had lost somewhat of interest in new things. So he did not care to tarry, but rode, with a mind heavy with graver matters, through the streets and out through the Temple Bar direct for Mackworth House, near the Savory Palace. It was with a great deal of interest that Myles and his patron regarded each other when they met for the first time after the half-year which the young soldier had spent in France. To Myles it seemed somehow very strange that his lordship's familiar face and figure should look so exactly the same. To Lord Mackworth, perhaps, it seemed even more strange that 6 short months should have wrought so great a change in this young man. The rugged exposure in camp and field during the hard winter that had passed had roughened that smooth bloom of his boyish complexion, and bronzed his fair skin almost as much as a midsummer sun could have done. His beard and mustache had grown again, now heavier and more mannish from having been shaved, and the white seam of a scar over the right temple gave, if not a stern, at least a determined look to the strong square jaw, young face. So the two stood for a while, regarding each other, and Miles was the first to break the silence. "My lord," said he, "ye did send for me to come back to England, and here I am." "When did ye land, Sir Miles?" said the Earl. "I and my squire landed at Dover upon Tuesday last," answered the young man. The Earl of Mackworth stroked his beard softly. "Ye are marvellously changed," said he. "I would not have thought it possible." Miles smiled somewhat grimly. "I have seen things, my lord, in France and in Paris," said he quietly, "as may make a lad a man before his time." "From which I gather," said the Earl, "that many adventures have befallen you. I thought you would find troublesome times in the Dauphin's camp, else I would not have sent you to France." A little space of silence followed, during which the Earl sat musingly, half absently, regarding the tall, erect, powerful young figure standing before him, awaiting his pleasures in motionless, patient, almost dogged silence. The strong, sinewy hands were clasped and rested upon the long, heavy sword, around the scabbard of which the belt was loosely wrapped, and the plates of mail caught and reflected in flashing, broken pieces the bright sunlight from the window behind. "Sir Miles," said the Earl suddenly, breaking the silence at last, "do you know why I have sent for you?" "Aye," said Miles calmly. "How can I else? You would not have called me from Paris but for one thing. I think you have sent for me to fight the Earl of Alban, and lo, I am here." "Ye speak very boldly," said the Earl. "I do hope that your deeds be as bold as your words." "That," said Miles, "you must ask other men. No one may justly call me a coward." "By my troth," said the Earl, smiling, "looking upon you, limbs, girth, bone, and sinew, I would not like to be the one that would dare accuse you of such a thing. As for your surmise, I may tell you plain that you are right, and that it was to fight the Earl of Albert I sent for you. The time is now very nearly ripe, and I shall straightforward send for your father to come to London. Meantime, it would not be safe either for you or for me to keep you in my service. I have spoken to His Highness the Prince of Wales, who, with other of the princes, is upon our side in this quarrel. He has promised to take you into his service until the fitting time comes to bring you and your enemy together, and tomorrow I shall take you to Scotland Yard, where His Highness is now lodging." As the Earl ended his speech, Miles bowed. He did not speak. The Earl waited for a little while, as though to give him the opportunity to answer. "Well, sirrah," he said at last, with a shade of impatience, "have you naught to say? You take all this with such marvellous coolness." "Have I then my lord's permission to speak mind?" "Aye," said the Earl, "say your say." "Sir," said Miles, "I have thought and pondered this matter much while abroad, and would now ask such a plain question out of all honesty, if I have your leave." The Earl nodded his head. "Sure, am I not right in believing that ye have certain weighty aims of your own to gain, if I win this battle against the Earl of Alban?" "Has my brother George been telling you aught to such a purpose?" said the Earl, after a moment or two of silence. Miles did not answer. "No matter," added Lord Mackworth. "I will not ask who told you such a thing. As for your question, well, since you ask it frankly, I will be frank with you. Yes, I have certain ends to gain in having this Earl overthrown." Miles bowed. "Sir," said he, "perhaps your ends are so much beyond anything that I can comprehend as though I were a little child. Only this I know, that they must be very great. Ye know well that in any case I would fight this battle for my father's sake, and for the honor of my own house. Nevertheless, in return for all that it will so greatly advantage you, will you not grant me a boon in return, should I overcome my enemy?" "What is this boon, Sir Miles?" will you grant me the favour to seek the Lady Alice de Morebury for my wife?" The Earl of Mackworth started up from his seat. "Sir Miles Falworth," he began violently, and then stopped, drawing his bushy eyebrows together with a frown, quite stern but not sinister. Myles withstood his look calmly and impassively, and presently the Earl turned on his heel and strode to the open window. A long time passed in silence while he stood there, gazing out of the window into the garden beyond with his back to the young man. Suddenly he swung around again. "Sir Miles," said he, "the family of Falworth is as good as any in Derbyshire. Just now it is a poor and fallen in estate, but if it is again placed in credit and in honour, ye, who are the son of the house, shall have your suit weighed with as much respect and as much consideration as though ye were my peer in all things. Such is my answer. Are ye satisfied?" "I could ask of you no more," answered Myles.